Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Corstein. I'm a Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center here at the Mariners Museum. And today I'm going to talk about a very controversial topic, and that just so happens to be George McClellan. Was he the master of amphibious operations? And how did he utilize the Union strengths to try to gain tactical and strategic advantages? And what was all about his leadership? What happened there? I'm not good with slideshows, but I'm going to try anyway. There's McClellan probably at the height of his fame, and McClellan was in some parts born into fame. And I say that because, he's born December 1826 to a family that was, very elitist. In fact, his father, George B. McClellan, happened to have been the founder of the Jefferson Medical School in Philadelphia, which then became part of the University of Pennsylvania. His grandfather was a general during the Revolutionary War. So, as a leadership standpoint, it comes to him in a natural way. And he is extremely intelligent as a result of, his upbringing, his knowledge, and so forth. I would have to say, young McClellan, wanted to follow, there's his father, wanted to follow his father into the medical career. However, Dad says, well, I got another son that's doing that, and I can't afford both of you to go to medical school. And so as a result of that, McClellan decides, I want to become a lawyer. Now, let me just tell you about McClellan in school. So he goes to this one prep school at age 11, and during a class, he corrects his professor. Professor says, you can't do that, blah, 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 blah. Sends a note to his father saying that your son is impetuous. And Dad, Dr. McClellan, said so. Was he correct in his questioning? And the answer was yes. So then McClellan goes to a prep school at University of Pennsylvania. And then he's able to go to the University of Pennsylvania. He will go there when he is 14 years old. Now remember, the University of Pennsylvania, there it is. These are the two schools. The one on the right happens to be the university itself. The one on the left is the Jefferson Medical School. So you can see that these are advanced learning facilities, and there are numerous doctors during the Civil War that attended the Jefferson Medical School. So anyway, he he gets interested in military science, as he says. And his interest in military science will lead him to want to go to West Point. Well, now he's 14 years old, where he asked Dad to do that. His father has a lot of political connections, especially he's a friend of John Tyler. So they say, yes, we can get you an appointment to West Point. Just turned 15. They said, but, acceptance, you have to be 16 to go. And so John Tyler says, oh, well, no, not really. And so McClellan goes. He's a brilliant student. I think, while he's at West Point, you form a lot of things. He becomes very aristocratic, in his thinking. And most of his friends are from where? The South, like A.P. Hill, Dabney Maury, George Pickett. They were all in the class of 1846. Now, it was said he was very studious, energetic, and ambitious. So that kind of tells us we already know who he is as a person. Now, in a class of 59 students, McClellan graduates second. and he only graduates second to a man that history has forgotten, Charles Seaford Stewart. So only because Stewart could draw better, right? And you think McClellan would have worked on that. He said he was cheated out of being first, but that's McClellan talking. As soon as McClellan graduates from West Point, what do we have? We have a war going on, the American-Mexican War, and he is sent down to Texas, to San Antonio, and then he goes to Brownsville, Corpus Christi. Now, he is supposed to join as an engineer Zachary Taylor's army. However, he becomes extremely ill with a combination of dysentery and malaria. In fact, that malaria is going to impact his commands during the Civil War in a tremendous way. Now, so Zachary Taylor, he is going to be lost out of favor because of his politics. And so Winfield Scott, then a major general, organizes an amphibious operation. Why? I want to get around the enemy so I can strike at their target faster than they can come back and defend it. This is a concept that's going to be McClellan's guiding light. And he learns it all from Winfield Scott. Winfield Scott, he's kind of like a pet to Winfield Scott, go do this. He was actually breveted to the rank of captain. He fought at Churubusco, Chapultepec. He did special reconnaissances for Winfield Scott. Actually, Winfield Scott is a close friend of McClellan's father. Look at all these connections that we're forging. So he will, after the end of the Mexican War, he's a brevet captain. He goes back to West Point to command the company of engineers that are maintaining the campus and everything. He's a little bored with that. Then he's sent down in 1851 to work on the construction of Fort Delaware. Okay, there's Churubusco. And here's Fort Delaware on Pea Patch Island in the Delaware Bay, right? So he works on building this fort. He then, in 52, will be assigned to Captain Randolph B. Marcy at Fort Smith, Arkansas, and so they have the job of finding the tributaries of the Red River. And so they go on this expedition. No one hears from them for months upon end. In fact, some people spread the rumor that they were all massacred because there were these scoundrels that were involved. They were all killed by 2,000 Comanches. So when Marcy and McClellan shows back up in Fort Smith, they go, "Are you a ghost?" And McClellan says those other people are unscrupulous. So anyway, McClellan survives all that, and in 1852, he will translate and publish a manual on bayonet tactics. This is a French manual. He is a brilliant French speaker, and so then he's assigned to survey Texas ports and rivers, and then this is going to be his next big expedition, is going to be to survey the route from St. Paul, Mississippi to the Puget Sound for a transcontinental railway. Now, McClellan, I don't know how much he liked to get his hands dirty, but by this time, he doesn't at all. And there are 4 passes you could take over the Cascade Mountains, and he picks one, Yakima Pass, and he says, this is the best way to go. Well, the governor of Territory of Washington, Isaac Stevens, says, "Are you sure? Did you go through the pass?" McClellan doesn't even answer. He says, "I want to see your reports." McClellan never sends them. So this starts to see the insubordination style from McClellan. He says, "That's the best pass. You need to believe me." It was not the best pass. In fact, the railroad, interstates, go over 3 other passes that are much better. But McClellan did not find this is a great opportunity for him. So he will return east while awaiting orders. He courts Ellen Mary Marcy. And Marcy is of course, his commander at one time. His daughter is cute. They all kind of, 9 different suitors from West Point graduates try to marry her, right? She turns them all down, but A.P. Hill. Now, the father knows the truth about A.P. Hill, because while A.P. Hill was a cadet at West Point, he arrived in New York waiting on a steamer to go to West Point, and he happened to go into a house of pleasure. And he was left with lifelong issues because of that. And, Colonel Marcy knew, and so they said, no, you can't marry him. Later, McClellan will marry Ellen Marcy in 1860. But in the meantime, he gets one of the most choice assignments, and that is going to be the working on the Delafield report. He and Major Delafield, Major Mordecai, and himself, right, brevet captain, are going to observe this war. So McClellan becomes involved with these various siege tactics, right? Remember, this is all building him up for the Civil War. So not only does he understand these siege tactics, he also witnesses ironclads, right? And ironclads defeating fixed fortification. One of his best friends, John Gross Bernard, they will study the concept of slope surfaces as best to deflect shot. Wow. Now, that's pretty good, but nevertheless, they will write the Delafield report. He also, there they are. You can see McClellan, a shadow off to the right, right there, okay? This is actually, this is a book that McClellan publishes, translates from the French. This is another book he will write as a result of his experiences during the siege of Sevastopol. And this is one that's telling us how future wars, how armies should be organized. He also is, of course, his exploration of the Red River, he'll write about. He's a prolific author, if you can imagine. This book about the European cavalry, now he's not a cavalry officer, but he goes and observes all of them. He likes the Prussian hussars, right, and which is heavy cavalry. So he will take their saddle and turn it into what is known as the McClellan saddle. This is Model 57 saddle, which is going to be used until the Army disbands the cavalry during World War II. So we say McClellan is brilliant, don't we? So McClellan has done some other special projects for Jefferson Davis, right? Davis considers McClellan a protege, so he gets to do a survey of railroads. How effective would they be in time of the war? He also will go to Santo Domingo, because remember what's happening in America at that time. We're expansionists, right? And especially the southern, as we would call it, slave power states are looking, since they know they can't expand but so far westward, they're now looking, where else can we go? Cuba is one of the choices. So is Santo Domingo. So actually, McClellan goes there, checks on the defenses, and realizes they're weak, goes back, reports to Jefferson Davis. They file the report. And I have to tell you, in 1870, Grant finds the report and thinks about conquering Santo Domingo. They don't do it, but the bottom line is that this shows that McClellan is a troubleshooter. McClellan is a brilliant writer. McClellan can do almost anything he wants to do. And so he will then, the post-time war army or peacetime army is kind of boring to him. So he will resign his commission, and then he becomes chief engineer of the Illinois Central Railroad. That's where he meets Lincoln, because Lincoln is a contract lawyer for that firm. He then, in 1860, is named president of the Ohio and Mississippi Railway. Wow. As president, he gets a salary of $10,000 a year. Now, we may snuff at that, but that's close to $1 million in today's money. So everybody liked McClellan. McClellan walked around with an air of leadership, with an air, I know what I'm doing. Only I can fix this, We hear that from some people, but in his case, it appears that only McClellan could fix certain things. And so he was not boasting. So, the war breaks out. Now, McClellan in the election of 1860 supported Stephen Douglas, a Democrat, right? And he is a fierce Democrat. He is not against, or he's against the abolition of slavery, believe it or not. And yet, when the war breaks out, Governor Dennison of Ohio offers him a major general commission in volunteers. Wow. He takes that job. He is very happy. That's the 3rd of May. He then, or 23 April, he takes that job. Then, on the 3rd of May, he's named commander of the Department of Ohio. And on 14 May, he is going to be promoted to Major General, regular Army. That makes him the second highest ranking officer in the United States Army, headed only by Winfield Scott. You remember Winfield Scott? McClellan was a great little pet. And so basically, while creating the Department of Ohio, he is going to organize a movement. Now, I got to tell you, as soon as he gets this regular Army commission, he's going to write Winfield Scott and says to Winfield Scott, the way we can win this war is, now, no one understands how terrible this war is going to become. But he says, you give me an army of 80,000 men, and we will move through the Kanawha Valley, and we'll strike and capture Richmond. War is going to be over. Or I'll take that 80,000 men, and I'm going to go down the rivers in Tennessee, right, and strike the very heartland of the Confederacy. Great plans. Winfield Scott says, yeah, I like this. What do you think about doing this, which was going down the Mississippi and then also capturing southern ports? That becomes the Anaconda Plan, but McClellan plays a role in this. Who did the greatest amphibious operation in American history to this date? Winfield Scott. Who wants to do the next greatest? George McClellan. So I have to say that Scott actually, when talking about McClellan, that he expressed great confidence in your intelligence, zeal, and science. However, he thought that the actually going down the Mississippi rather than the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers would be the strongest way to go. Now, so he, as commander of the Department of Ohio, he'll fight one of the first battles of the Civil War. It's not really a battle, because when the Federals come, the Confederates all ran away. so there's no stand up and shooting or anything. One Confederate was injured, John Hanger, and loses a leg, and he starts making, prosthesis legs and arms for those who are injured during the war. So he will, using maneuver, right? He's operating against a smaller Confederate force, about 1,800 men. He has 7,000. He also has his corps commander under him would be William Stark Rosecrans. Yes, another West Point graduate. So he's going to win the Battle of Rich's Mountain on 11 July, 1861. This is great. Why? Because everyone the Union hasn't won a victory yet. And so this is like, and who takes the credit for the battle? McClellan, right? And now, 12 days later is going to be what? The Battle of First Manassas. The Federals lose tremendously. The army is disorganized. Who does Winfield Scott is the man to reorganize the Union Army? But George McClellan. And George McClellan will actually come to the east, and he is kind of amazed. He says that he felt that the public had chosen him as the man of the hour, pointed to by my events, and chosen by an overwhelming weight of public and private opinion. So he thinks he's the cat's meow. And he comes to Washington at the very time that we need to organize the Union Army. He creates what's known as the Army of the Potomac, and which he does what? Gives them better, they feel better about themselves, greater morale. He feeds them. He uniforms them. They even got good shoes. They even are, made into regiments. They drill. Everything you need to do to create an army, McClellan has done. They are the perfect parade ground army. Meanwhile, McClellan is going to also build fortifications around Washington. Washington is going to be defended by over 400 guns. Fort Ward is still an existing fort from that defensive system that was created. George McClellan is working with John Barnard. And so at that time, he writes a letter to his wife. I find myself in a new and strange position here. President, Cabinet, General Scott, all deferring to me by some strange operation of magic. I seem to have become the power of the land, right? And as the power of the land, I almost think that they will aim to give me, with some small success, the opportunity to become a dictator or anything else that might please me. But nothing of that kind would please me. Therefore, I won't be a dictator. Admirable self-denial, he says. But, he did think he should be the dictator. He's not the first one. This is his wife, right? Here's the Battle of Rich's Philippi. Here he is when he comes to Washington, D.C. This shows you how he forces the Confederates away from, right, West Virginia. West Virginia, he reports, is basically on what? That's now part of the Union. In fact, the West Virginians want to separate themselves from Virginia. Now, I got to tell you, this gives him greater glory. See what I mean about the grand review? I mean, he liked to have his army marching all around. He had this horse, 18 hands high, known as Devil Dan Webster. And he used to ride it all the time through the streets with a bunch of staff behind him as if he's on an important mission going from camp to conference to camp. Everyone says, wow, this guy is great. The big problem is he, has too much caution, right, as he builds his army to reach 122,000 men, he's facing off against the Confederates at Manassas Junction. He thinks the Confederates have twice amount of soldiers as he does. Now, as Lincoln will tell Edwin Stanton, this is impossible. That means there are no other Confederates defending the rest of the Confederacy. Remember, there's 6 million Caucasian people in the South versus 23 million Caucasians in the North. That balance is who's going to win. Well, you think the Union, but it's impossible for the Confederacy to have such a large army all positioned up in Manassas. So basically, McClellan will come into some problems. He says Scott is in his way. There is the Battle of Ball's Bluff, where Colonel Baker unadvisedly crosses the Potomac and is defeated in a little battle near Leesburg, Virginia. McClellan now, is faced with a decision. He has to do something. Now, McClellan becomes very ill with typhoid fever, exacerbated by his malaria, so he's extremely sick. As he's recovering, actually, Lincoln comes to see him, and McClellan says, tell him I can't see him, I'm just too unwell. Now, you don't do that to the president, but he did it. Why? He thought he was the power in the land. In fact, by 10 January, Lincoln has a meeting with all of his McClellan's corps commanders, and he basically says, if General McClellan does not want to use the army, I would like to borrow it from him for a time. In other words, Lincoln wants him to get going. But actually, McClellan has been going. And what he's been doing is organizing, right? He left the Department of Ohio, which is taken over by Henry Halleck. And what does Halleck do? He uses those troops to come down the Mississippi with John Pope, to come down the Cumberland and Tennessee rivers with whom? U.S. Grant. These are amphibious operations that are all conceived by McClellan. He also will have Benjamin Franklin Butler recruit a corps that will go with Farragut to capture New Orleans. The Navy said we can do it on our own, but McClellan knew better. They had to have troops. And so Ben Butler goes along with them. The biggest amphibious operation he really thinks of at that time is going to be the capture of Roanoke Island. McClellan did not like Lincoln. He called him the original guerrilla. And nothing ever nice to say about him. And Lincoln knew he was saying all these nasty things about him. So once again, you could see how this operation is part of the concepts of McClellan, and Roanoke Island really brings it forth. Now, he's already conceived, and he worked with Lincoln on 12 January to do what will be called the Urbana Plan. And the Urbana Plan is to bring the Army of the Potomac around the main Confederate Army, land at Urbana on the Rappahannock River. I got 50 miles to where? Richmond. Where are the Confederates? Up there at Manassas. How far are they away? 70 miles. So who's going to win that race? And that plan also said, I'm going to send another force around and up the James River that will capture, in other words, will get Richmond by two sides. Now, there's a lot of things that happened to McClellan. Now, he actually sits down, talks about the Urbana Plan. He goes to Lincoln, talks to him again on May 5th about how great the Urbana Plan is. Lincoln says, well, you got to move against the Confederate forces up here. Joe Johnson, commander of the army at Manassas for the Confederacy, guess what he does? I'm outnumbered, I'm going to retreat. So all of a sudden he falls back to Fredericksburg. The Urbana plan is out the door. Now also McClellan then comes back. Guess what? He goes and sees Lincoln on March 8th. Says, I got an even better plan. I'm going to come down to the peninsula, right? And I am going to use the York and the James River to support the flanks of my army as well as carry our supplies, and we will march on Richmond. And with my siege train, he's got 104 heavy siege guns with him, and that he knows he will be able to capture Richmond. Now, so when he's talking to Lincoln about this, guess what happens? The CSS Virginia comes out and sinks the Cumberland and the Congress. Oh my gosh. The next day, the Monitor comes, kind of holds the Virginia off, but the big issue is going to be, I can't use the James River. So then McClellan says, have no fear. Now, he's got 122,000 men, which he's got 357 transports to carry his army down the Chesapeake Bay. Now he says, what I really want to do now is I'm going to go up the peninsula, right? And this is where the reports are that John Bankhead Magruder has his army. So what McClellan wants to do is go to Yorktown and then send the First Corps under the command of McDowell and to land at Sarah's Creek and, cause the Confederate fortifications at Gloucester Point to surrender, basically. And then he's able to flank the Confederate army, maybe even double envelop it. And who's the next door? Richmond. So McClellan has these great ideas. The trouble is he is facing other people. Now I want to mention Roanoke Island just a bit, because Roanoke Island with Burnside, this is McClellan's concept. He will control New Bern. Eventually he captures Beaufort, North Carolina, Fort Macon, North Carolina. He captures Elizabeth City. Now, let me ask you, how far is Elizabeth City from Norfolk?
80 miles.
It's less than that.
30 miles.
It's about 40 miles, believe it. Yes. Over bad roads and everything. But the trouble is, they also have what? The Great Dismal Swamp Canal, right? And so the idea was for Burnside to come up the Great Dismal Swamp Canal to attack Norfolk from its vulnerable south side. John Barnard goes to Lincoln and says, look, we don't need to really mess with the peninsula as much. All we have to do is capture Norfolk, because if we capture Norfolk, the Confederate ironclad doesn't have a port anymore. And that means we can go up by way of the south side and more rapidly than the Confederates using the James River, boom, we will capture Richmond. Well, McClellan didn't like that plan, although it would have been resulting in him being the next president, probably. But his idea of amphibious operations is very critical at this time of the Civil War. Now, McClellan, this is what his concepts are. I don't know how many of y'all have been to the battlefield of Richmond battlefields, and you go to Chickahominy Bluffs, which is right above Mechanicsville, right near Beaver Dam. If McClellan, his idea is to plant my main supply base at White House on the Pamunkey, a deep water port, and Cumberland Landing, I can then strike towards Richmond. If I get to Chickahominy Bluffs, which are 3.5 miles away from where? Downtown Richmond. I can put all my heavy guns, right, up there, and as a result, I can win the day. Now, the big trouble is he has to get there. And because he ignores Bernard, he ignores capturing Norfolk. Actually, this guy, Louis Malchibres Goldsborough, one of my favorite officers of the Civil War, he weighed about 350 pounds. One day he ate an entire chicken and bounced his stomach, said monsterly good. He's a little slow doing things. And so when McClellan goes to him and says, I need your help going past the York River batteries, Goldsborough says, no, I'm afraid of the Confederate ironclad. So McClellan has no choice but to lay a siege of Yorktown. This is the biggest mistake he makes to date, and he's already made some big mistakes. Number one, he hasn't forced Burnside to go up the Great Dismal Swamp Canal. They don't move up the canal until 19 April. That means they do fight the Battle of South Mills, but there's no urgency. Jesse Reno, commander of the Union troops there, fighting Ambrose Wright, actually said, my men are too tired and fatigued to go farther. Now, they have no Confederates in front of them, and the next stop is what? Norfolk. Norfolk is really a big key, which McClellan overlooks. So when he brings his army up the peninsula, and there are two main roads going up the peninsula, the Great Warwick Road, Warwick Boulevard, and the Hampton-York Highway. And there's nothing high about that way. Okay, I just want to tell you, you got to cross at Big Bethel and go up. It's a muddy track. In fact, everyone complains because when McClellan starts his army, it starts to rain. And it rains so much, they said, one soldier said, he witnessed a mule sinking all the way up to its ears, mother, despite being a small mule. In other words, one officer, Charles Wainwright, will study the soil and he goes, oh my gosh, there's sandy loam for 5-6 inches, and then all below that is a mile of clay. You break through that top surface. So McClellan is slow in coming up, and John Bankhead Magruder practiced his great ruse against McClellan, moving his men up and down the fortifications to appear that he has more men. McClellan, using Alfred Pinkerton and also escaped enslaved people, he thinks Magruder has not the 13,000 men he has, not 50,000 men, but 100,000 men. In fact, one Southern newspaper wrote, it was amazing that each corps commander could see the gaudy attire of the master of ruses and strategy, John Bankhead Magruder. Oh my gosh, he becomes extremely famous. So McClellan wastes an entire month, all right? And that waste of an entire month is so critical. He loses his amphibious operation at Yorktown because he delays so much time that allows the Confederates to bring more men up to the peninsula. In fact, there are estimates that Lee will have, at the beginning of the 7 days battles, over 117,000 men. Now, there are other reports he had 80 or 90,000 men, but in other words, he's almost equal to McClellan because McClellan has delayed. There is no urgency with McClellan. And of course, we know the 7 days battles. McClellan, like during the Battle of Williamsburg, when finally the Confederates retreat, right? This is a terrible battle because McClellan stays in Yorktown during the entire battle and does what? He will actually orchestrate the boarding of William Buell Franklin's division to go up the York River to cut off the Confederates. He didn't need to do that. William Buell Franklin was first in his class at West Point. He kind of knew what he was doing. McClellan knew he could hear in Yorktown the Battle of Williamsburg happening. And the Federals will win this battle at the very end because of Winfield Scott Hancock, who will actually be able to flank the Confederate positions, causing a Confederate attack. They are defeated there, and the Battle of Williamsburg is over. It's a drawn battle, but the Confederate army escapes and is able to get up the peninsula because Franklin does not actually execute his orders properly by landing his troops at Eltham's Landing. He wants to stay under the protection of what? The Navy guns. That's not how you win a war. McClellan, we can talk a lot about him. This is his last major amphibious operation. The 7 days battle do not do well for McClellan. Now, at Yorktown, when the Battle of Williamsburg is going on, he doesn't go to the battle at all. He allows Edwin Bull Sumner to stay in command of the forces that are attacking the Confederates. And Edwin Bull Sumner was not the smartest pencil in the box, let's put it that way. In fact, it was said he was nicknamed Old Bull because he was bullheaded, and also because a musket ball hit him in the forehead during the Mexican War and bounced off. So, he wasn't the smartest card in the deck, and as a result of that, McClellan misses an opportunity, a major one, right here. You got to realize that they could have cut off the Confederate army. But McClellan was not there to push the troops forward, and Sumner did not understand the battlefield and thought the battle was in front of him instead of off to his right flank. So this tells us about McClellan. McClellan believes a commanding general should stay behind the lines, getting information and telling men what to do. Okay? At Gaines Mill is where he's not. He creates this great supply base at White House on the Pamunkey. However, when Fitzjohn Porter is defeated at the Battle of Gaines Mill, and McClellan knows that parts of Jackson's army has been brought down, he panics and decides to change his base all the way to the James River. Now, when he is at Mechanicsville, he's 5 miles from Richmond. He has 1 mile to get to his place because of all these heavy siege guns he's brought down with him. He has the great opportunity to really win the war. He also, when the Confederates defeat the Union Navy at Drewry's Bluff, the commander of the Union flotilla, John Rodgers, says, "Send me a division, we'll take this fort, and we'll be in Richmond." They're 8 miles from Richmond. And so McClellan goes from 8 miles to Richmond, and then 5 miles from Richmond, 1 mile short of Chickahominy Bluffs, where he can bombard. The Confederates didn't have cannons like McClellan. McClellan has 13-inch seacoast mortars. He's got just about everything you need to win a war. These are his big camps there. But instead, he loses his nerve. He sends a nastygram to Lincoln, blaming Lincoln for all these problems because he hasn't sent him enough men. McClellan is the beau idea of an officer, always well uniformed, always in charge, always able to gain the respect of his army. In fact, after the Second Manassas Battle, he saves the Union Army just by arriving them. He gives them a greater morale boost. But on his great chance to win this great amphibious operation that he had learned from one of the greatest generals of the 19th century in the U.S. Army, Winfield Scott, he falters at the very end. So was George McClellan the master of amphibious operations? On paper, he was. In function, in action, he was not, because he lacked this killer instinct. He could plan anything, but when Lincoln demotes him to just commander of the Army of the Potomac, he should have stayed instead as general-in-chief, planning everything, and have a more aggressive officer be in charge of the actual army itself. And they would have found probably greater success because of the condition of the Confederates at the time. So that's a little bit about George McClellan. I should have another 2 hours, but the bottom line is we know McClellan has so many attributes that make him a general that could have won the war in 62. But because of his own fallacies, his caution, he will be defeated by Lee during the 7 days that culminates the Great Peninsula Campaign. Just think of his lost opportunities. South Mills, right below Norfolk, Drury's Bluff, 8 miles from Richmond, Mechanicsville, 5 miles from Richmond. Yet he allows a smaller force to push him back, so he abandons this great supply depot, burning all sorts of stuff, and then moving everything around to the James River. It was probably one of the greater mistakes done by a Union general during the Civil War, but I will tell you right now how brilliant was McClellan to get his army to that position. He lacked that killer instinct. Thank you very much.